RFK Jr. has long been critical of vaccine mandates. And as HHC secretary now, do you think he'll be able to reshape federal policy or on vaccine, or will he face too much resistance?
Well, thank you for having me. The U.S. healthcare industry is $5 trillion. Of course, vaccines are just a piece of that. But I mean, we're talking about the biggest of battleships, and as they say about battleships, they move around only very slowly. And I think Senator Kennedy, pardon me, Secretary Kennedy, has strong views on this, but other people have strong views too. I noted during the confirmation hearings that Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who's the chairman of the Health Committee in the U.S. Senate, had a long list of concerns and stipulations, and among them he said, "I, and speaking for the Senate, want." Say so on personnel choices. I want advance clearance on announcements. I want you to come and testify once a quarter before the Senate, what they call the Help Committee. So there's in the American system, there are so many checks and balances according to the Constitution and according to just all of the yeast and pluralism of American society that I'm thrilled that Secretary Kennedy will get a chance to make his arguments. I'm also thrilled that the counterpoint of view, including Senator Cassidy, will also get to make his arguments. That's the American way to debate it out and hope and trust that the truth will emerge.
No. Okay. Now, his agenda includes investigating pharmaceutical pricing and medical research funding. Could this lead to meaningful reform, or is it more about political posturing?
Well, here again, I mean, the budget of the Department of Health and Human Services, depending on how you measure it, is about $3 trillion all in, 3 trillion, and so that including Social Security. Look, Secretary Kennedy is going to try and do all the things you said, and there's been a huge loss of confidence in among the American public in, for example, vaccines, the COVID vaccine. I mean, again, the the general feeling is the vaccine itself was probably a good idea, but the government under the previous administration way oversold it as something that everybody ought to get it. The fact probably the proper strategy was to administer the vaccine to the vulnerable and to leave the healthy alone and not sweep them into the same edict. I think that was a huge mistake, and I think all the lockdowns and close downs were a big mistake and much to be regretted. So it's going to be a while before the public health establishment, of which Secretary Kennedy is now the head of, is able to regain the confidence of the American people on this issue. And then there's the second issue. It's sort of related. Speaking of COVID, and that's the origins of the COVID virus. I mean, there's a substantial view in America, including led by Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who's the chairman of the House, probably the Senate Oversight Committee. He's digging deep into this Wuhan lab issue, and again, an argument that the virus came from a Chinese lab 5 years ago, and that was seen as an extreme conspiracy theory. Now it's generally regarded as the simple truth. And so all the officials who were saying, oh, no, no, it's just a conspiracy theory, don't worry about that, have to explain themselves now. And again, I can't think of a better investigator than Secretary Kennedy to say, listen, why were you so wrong? Tell me, explain to me and to the American people why we should take your word for it now when you clearly made a big, epic, civilization-changing mistake just a few years ago.
Well, but here, Mr. Kennedy has framed his mission as a fight against corporate influence in public health. So, do you think he's genuinely challenging big pharma, or could his policies have unintended consequences?
Well, I mean, look, he's certainly been around power and politics literally all his life. His uncle was elected president when he was 9 years old, and he's been to the Oval Office as a teenager, and then had a father and another uncle who were also U.S. senators. So Kennedy understands the game of Washington pretty well. He's very much an outsider, but he also had an insider background. So I said, look, here we are in Washington and around the world watching this because we understand that these decisions and arguments being made about the vaccines not only apply to American public health but apply to the world's public health. And so they're all important questions. And again, as somebody who's obviously anybody interested in healthcare was following this pretty closely. There's a lot of lessons to learn from around the world. For example, Sweden, had a much different COVID policy than the United States did, and I think it's been vindicated as actually better. And so I hope that Secretary Kennedy and the Trump administration and the U.S. Senate and the Congress and the public health establishment overall are paying close attention to successes around the world on these issues, even as they try to zero in on this seemingly insane policy of gain of function research, which had the U.S. government funding scientists how to make a more deadly virus. That doesn't strike me as a very good idea, and I would love to see more open hearings, in legal and also political courts, just to say, what were you thinking when you funded somebody to figure out how to make a virus that can kill people better?
Mr. James, the critics or his critics argue that his stance on vaccines could lead to a decline in public trust in immunization programs. And how much of risk does this pose to the national public health?
Well, there is a risk. There's no question. Depending on how you feel about vaccines, vaccine non-compliance, has been an issue in American politics for a long time. It used to be sort of a left-wing issue when Kennedy was seen himself as kind of a left-winger, and now it's become sort of a right-wing issue. And maybe it's both. Maybe it is just a genuine question as to the utility of vaccines. I personally am pro-vaccine, but again, I wasn't elected president. I wasn't appointed Secretary of the Health and Human Services Department. So it is in all cases, on any issue, including, for example, climate change, there's just, I think, no such thing as settled science on these matters. It's always in evolution. It's always new information to learn. And so if the public health establishment wishes to keep to its position on vaccines, which I think is a good way to go about it, they need to recognize they have to go out and persuade.